Well, welcome, Emily, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so happy to be here.
I know, it's like we were just talking a few minutes ago, and we did a live with you in the spring, and we got a tour of your garden, and then we did another live with you for International Lonely Bouquet Day, and I kind of feel like you've been on the podcast already, and so, but this is the official episode, so I'm really
official now. We're making it official.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's awesome. So, okay, so Emily, you're in Belgium.
Right.
And I love this. And so I want to hear kind of your story, share, briefly kind of how you got there, how'd you get in flowers, and I don't know, just dive in.
Well, it's all one big love story, actually,
Oh, fun.
of the humankind and flower kind.
Okay, I love
but
it.
but I grew up in Oakland, California, which is like almost as far away from Belgium as you could possibly be. But and did nothing with flowers. I was actually dissuaded from my dad early on for a high school job. I was kind of encouraged to get a high school job, and I thought, ooh, the flower shop always smells so nice when you walk by, and it's always so intriguing. Maybe I could do something there and help out there. There's no future in that, you know. So my mom gardened casually, so I had the very casual exposure to like Johnny jump ups and hydrangeas, and California is such a great climate. There's always something blooming. So nature was beautiful, but I never really considered flowers as any kind of future. So studied totally different things like anthropology and sociology.
Really?
Yes. So yeah, it was like this really cool program actually at University of California, San Diego, and it was called International Studies. And within that, so it was this really cool combination of history and sociology and anthropology and politics. Like it was all kind of rolled into one program, and then you could choose within that program two majors pretty much. And I was really intrigued by people. So I chose anthropology and sociology. But little did I know that it would actually come in super handy now with the international teaching and the students coming from all over and being so fascinated with people.
Yeah,
and,
really.
but yeah, so that was what I was doing in California, and I met a Dutch guy, fell in love, thought he was going to move to the United States, found out he had no plans to. So
oh no.
Of like, okay, where do we go from here? Decided to wing it and try living in Belgium, and totally fell in love with the slower pace of life, the nature, so many different things, the food, the croissants. So I basically kind of left a lot behind in order to start a life here, and kind of felt lost. But there's this really cool culture here of people having these vegetable gardens and growing a lot of their own in just these really small plots. So the house that we ended up moving to here had this small vegetable garden, and my mother-in-law she's really into being busy all the time, and she offered to kind of help start a vegetable garden. So I got into that, and I was like, well, this is fun, kind of digging into the soil and getting dirty. And then we got married, and I thought, or we were going to get married, I should say. And I thought, oh, well, I'll grow my own flowers, and I'll do the flowers because this will be fun. So that's when I started growing flowers and completely fell in love. So that's how I got here.
I love. So how long have you been there?
I've been here now. I think it's 13 years now.
Wow.
So
So how's your Belgium or?
Belgium, it's good. I'm much more like, Belgium is so weird because it has, I mean, or I should say interesting. Belgium is so interesting that it has it's a multiple language country. So it's technically bilingual, although there's also a little section right near where we live that's also Germanic speaking. So you've got the Flemish, the French, and then we live right by the border. So where my husband grew up is like 20 minutes over the border, and that's Dutch. So my Dutch is much better than my French, even though we live in a French village. So that's interesting, but
Yeah, that's crazy. And to me, that would be my biggest obstacle to overcome is language and just learning that. But I guess when you're immersed in it,
that's a thing. Yeah.
yeah.
It's just like you just have to kind of. I took French classes at an evening school for adults, and then the Dutch. I just kind of like the evening school was an evening like a French class for Dutch adults. So indirectly, you kind of get double exposure. And I would go to the market here, and everybody would immediately start speaking to me in Dutch instead of French. And I was like, I don't speak either one. I was like, sorry.
You're really good at pointing.
And then they're like, don't touch the fruit. No.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay, so for anybody who doesn't know Emily, her Instagram handle is Fleuropean. And so now you understand why, which I love. And so tell us about your business. Like what is your business model? I mean, I know that you've done a lot of educational things, and I know with 2020 we've all been kind of changing things a little bit. Yeah. So
I started growing just for my own experimentation and artistic expression and having fun, pretty much. I started as a hobby, and I was actually blogging at the time, which is funny. So I kind of shared my process through blogging, which if you look back now, you'd be like, oh no. But it ended up, as I progressed, not in the very beginning, but as I got further, it ended up getting the attention of a German wedding planner. And so she contacted me because there isn't really this, or there wasn't when I first started, this big demand for the more natural style, the more natural approach to floristry. Everything is pretty, and still is pretty traditional in terms of the flower world here. But over in Germany, just across the border, there was kind of more of this demand for my style. So I did several weddings, and then kind of quickly realized that how I was growing flowers wasn't built necessarily for providing purely for weddings. I found that most of the weddings tended to be similar, like everybody would see that one wedding and be like, oh, I want that. So all of a sudden I was doing like 7 of the same, like cafe au lait dahlias, and the kind of standard cafe au lait, blush, pale, creamy colored palette, which for me, if you know my work, is not totally what I'm all about. I love it. I totally embrace it as well, but I'm so inspired by color. So at that time where I was kind of having this moment of like, is this really what I want to be doing? A lady through Instagram, which was great when Instagram was first getting started, since it was so visual and you could really reach people in such a wonderful way. A Belgian lady from Instagram, who I'm still super close with, and we're really good flower friends, which is wonderful, Bouquet Flowers. She reached out and she said, hey, would you ever consider teaching me a class? Like if I could come for a day and just kind of see what you're doing. And I had this moment, of like, oh, do I really have anything to give? Like, what do I do? Like, how do I teach? It's a totally different set of skills, teaching and explaining what you're doing versus just doing it. So that was my first dipping my toes into teaching. And I found that was perfect for me. That was really what I really, really, really wanted to do, because I could share what inspires me with somebody else, and then the inspiration was contagious. You all of a sudden getting excited, and you're all creating together, and it's just this wonderful flow of creative energy that's so important to me as an artist. So I just kind of kept going, oh, okay. And then like relatively soon after that, another student who came to visit reached out and said, hey, this American florist is looking to create a workshop overseas. Is that something? And I thought of you and your garden, and thought maybe you guys could hook up. And that's Madison from Heart Floral. And we immediately, we were like, oh, let's do a Skype and see if this is anything, and through the Skype, we were like, yeah, it was a great connection right away. And that's how I got into really hosting workshops and planning workshops, and that kind of collaborative effort of putting together those workshops. And that's
Wow.
what I'm doing now. Although 2020 sure threw us for a loop.
Yeah, I know because I know when we've talked before. I mean, things canceled, of course, and couldn't do certain things, and I, you know, so I kind of want to go back for just a second because this traditional style that is um, indicative of the area you're living. How would you describe that?
Oh, like really classic. You know, it's like the ball bouquets, like everything's tighter, neater. Like even when you look at people's gardens here, they're very neat. All these beautiful like forsythia shrubs are like neatly in these little balls, you know. So to me, there's this uh, uh, so it's total personal taste, you know, but to me there's this beautiful movement that the branches take, and that adds something wonderful to the shrubs as they're growing and blooming, you know. But people here tend to
Yeah,
kind of like things defined and
controlled.
controlled. Yeah, it's yes, exactly, totally. It's not about letting the flower do their thing. It's just kind of about having making the flower do what you want and having that like kind of
Right.
like predefined shape.
Yeah, I totally get it. Because I think, it's so funny, years and years of buying like ilex branches or forsythia through Holland, and you get these chopped off branches that have been pruned to have
Yes,
all, I mean, there's tons more flowers per stem. So I totally get it. And it is beauty, it's beautiful, but it's not natural. And so yeah, and so I totally get what you're saying, and I know a lot of times a lot of European bouquets you see in like the Dutch grocery stores or things like that are these compact, very. I mean, they're beautiful, but they're very tight, very condensed. They're not flowing and everywhere and dancing flowers and all this
totally,
kind of.
totally. Yes, they're beautiful. Like every art has its own beauty. It's
Right.
just totally a different aesthetic and approach, which is great, but difficult when you're trying to like make your way into the market here and there's no demand for it or interest in it.
Right. So, which I think it's interesting that so someone else approached you because they must have seen your style or some glimpse of it and then thought, I want to learn that.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like yeah, it started through the wedding planner who probably was thinking a little bit outside the box and thinking, oh, I want to offer something unique and different than what you see here, and so approached me. And then from that, you get indirectly other exposure and somebody saying, hey, that's cool. That's an interesting approach. Or yeah, so yeah, it's totally word of mouth and just like this natural evolution that feels really nice, and it allows you to also grow slowly instead of all of a sudden being thrown in the deep end and being like, here, teach these like 20 students what you do, you know.
Yeah,
You,
totally. And I think too that it's so cool because it's okay. So now this might be me speaking just because, of course, I love everything you do and
oh.
you're wonderful and all those things, but you have revolutionized all of Belgium's flowers. That's what I want to say.
Oh, I don't know, I don't. Well, thank you, Scott. That'll go on my gravestone.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Like to think so. I don't know. I don't. I'm sure it's just like this natural process too of that exposure that the internet provides to and social media provides, where you're getting to see what everybody else is doing all over the place. It's just
Right.
this. It's this wonderful invitation to grow also and try new things. You know.
Well, okay, so I don't even know where to start because with moving on with questions because there's so many things I want to ask you. Okay, so obviously you still garden because that was one of the things I think um, the reason why this is like got so many layers for me is because I know you grow, and I know some of the things you grow just create like me to be obsessed and wish I could just like come see that in person, and then I see what you design with what you grow, and I know there's an element of like foraging that has to go on as well with some of what you do. Um, and it all comes together to create these masterpieces, these images that is a whole nother layer of photography to everything. And so you're kind of like the triple threat out there. And so you grow it, you design it, and you photograph it. And so I, and then you teach people how to do the same thing. And I think that's just awesome. Um, okay, so one of the questions that, in light of what I just said, one of the questions that I'm continually plagued with when I see your work is this is a big buildup here, I know. Is you grow some things, and I just think, how does she know when she's planting her garden what colors to plant? Because you always have the most amazing combinations of color, and I'm like, that cannot be an accident. And so how do you approach that? Because I'm sure we have flower farmers listening that want to know how they can provide, that kind of product, um,
Totally. Yeah,
for their flower obsessed customers, like I would be.
totally.
And so how do you plan that out?
Oh, that's what I love so much about teaching is it really allows me to choose what I want to grow in the garden, what inspires me, because I know that inspiration will be contagious
Yeah.
and that will help open eyes and doors and whatever it might open for people who will come and visit. But it is such a I always call it a carefully curated garden. Like I really go through each year and I think, okay, what is inspiring me? Because the taste totally changes. Like when
Yeah.
like 5 years ago, I was so enthralled with all the brown roses, and I still am to some extent. That's always kind of in there, but like and those are permanent fixtures. So if you invest in roses, you're going to really want to invest in ones that will stick around and not be ultra trendy or whatever.
Sure.
Um, but for the annual, like I also have, I've really like how do I describe my process? So I really like over the year, over the growing season, I'm really looking at, okay, what have I been able to combine really nicely together, and what do I love, and I choose probably like 10 backbone elements like creme brulee phlox. And they're usually, I like to call them confused colors. They're usually colors that are neither here nor there, like creme brulee phlox could go purple, it could go brown, it could go even like toward the kind of creamy colors. It could go, you could use it as a contrast color against rusty mustards. It could go in so many. So those are the ones that I'm like, okay, I want to grow a lot of those. And then, and that would include like my creme brulee phlox. The Earl Grey Larkspur is another one of those.
Love
Like,
that flower.
wow, it could go in so many different directions. Elements, pansies. Like pansies are like my number one inspirational flower because you get these color palette. Like nature gives you this gift of like, hey, here's this color palette. Work with this. And so within the pansy, you get like these ambers, rust, purples, and it kind of gives you this like aha moment of like, oh, look at those together, so I really like to use one element like that. I know in my arranging, I like to choose one element like that kind of gives me that gift of my color palette and then build from there. So I kind of try to plan the rest of the garden with like, okay, if I'm looking at these 10 varieties of flowers that I really want to grow, what dahlias might work within these equations, and what other annuals, like what zinnias or what, like, but
Sweet
dahlias,
peas.
roses, dahlias, and pansies are probably like the things that I invest in heavily.
I
And
know
then,
you grow sweet peas.
yeah, I grow sweet peas. You know what? I grew so many sweet peas and I hardly used them this year. It was so strange. So I'll do that too, where I'll grow something and then I'm like, I'm not even like, I didn't cut. I cut hardly any of my double click cosmos, which are usually one of my favorites. So you also evolve through the years where all of a sudden you think like, should I not grow that next year? I really didn't use it, but they're all so intertwined for me. Like it's this,
Mm.
it's such an important combination of things. Like growing to me, I don't think I'd be the florist that I am if I didn't grow my own ingredients. Just because nobody could read my mind and think ahead like, oh, hey, I'll plant this. It's just such a tightly woven fabric, growing and arranging for me. And that's kind of what makes me me, I guess.
Yeah, well, for sure, well, totally. I feel like I know the term that we use for some of these flowers are they're like bridges, color bridges, because they can
Uh-huh.
connect so many different colors together. And I think it's interesting that you focus on growing several, like that's a main thing you really look for when you plant, which I think ends up, I mean, it's really a stroke of brilliance, if you ask me. Well, because you think about it, if you are on a walk and you see these beautiful autumn leaves that have these colors in them, well, the more bridges you have in the garden, you can almost take anything that nature's throwing your way and then find a connection, somehow.
And if you have those few unique elements, you can use relatively standard elements. Like, so I always tell people who have a small garden or a really small space, grow those really unique elements, because from the wholesaler, you could get amber colored dahlias
Right.
or rusty colored but it's those unique elements that are going to stand out and make people say, wow, when they see your work. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that really brings it all together. And you can't get those readily available from most wholesalers, or you can't forage them. Those are really things that you have to intentionally grow.
Yeah. Now that's a great, great point. And it helps you really prioritize what you plant.
Totally. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I love that. And then I know, okay, so I'm just going to jump in here and tell everybody, if you haven't been to our website, theflowerpodcast.com, um, Emily has sent us some of the most amazing images, some of which you might have seen before, but most of them I hadn't. And I was just awestruck because of what she creates, both in imagery and in design. And so be sure you go to our website to see all of her images, because you won't be disappointed. In fact, okay, so like always, I'm jumping around here. Um, it's crazy. So when you sent me these images, I'm like, how does this girl know that what the Pantone colors are going to be for this year?
So
Because
weird. I know, right? So I was so into yellow last year. All of a sudden there was like and it's just something that, it's just a taste. It's like what clothes you want. Like how fashion designer design thinks like, oh, I'm gonna do like whatever, mauve is gonna be the color of the year for me. Like I somehow yellow was really inspirational to me last year, and so it was so funny for me to see. But everybody, I've been seeing that a lot in the flower community though. A lot of people are kind of have been saying like, oh, let's bring yellow back, or let's it's gonna make a comeback this year. I know it. So.
yeah, you're right. I know it was interesting because I remember an interview we did with Holly Chappell, not last year, but the end of 2019, and they were talking about, maybe it was the beginning of, yeah, I think it was around the end of 2019. They were talking about yellow and the comeback of yellow, and then of course here we are with this new Pantone color, and when I saw what you sent me, I was like, amazing. But at the same time, though, a lot of what I saw, again, you can see this, what you just described, the foraging with the transitional colors that you have. You've got some key components and I can't wait to see with daffodils and things, because I know how you love those,
Yeah.
what you're going to have this year. Let's back up and talk about design, because I feel like your aesthetic, you just have, it's such a romantic way of designing. I can't think of a better word, but because I feel like that almost is not enough of what I really think. How do you approach design? Like as far as elements go, as far as colors go? Because I know it's different when you're creating for you, probably, as
Right.
opposed to when you're creating for, I mean, I know you don't do weddings really now, but if you were to do something like that, what do you look for, and how do you prioritize what you select?
I try to grow some nice foundational elements, because so much of how I design is based on layering, and kind of building this foundation and then layering on in um, in weighty succession. Like, so you're gonna, you go from your foundation to your bulkier elements to your lighter elements to your very fine little dainty dancers.
Mhm.
So that's how I approach design. It's really about kind of, and I really try to think of designs in a three-dimensional manner. Like, you're not just building your shape up and down, or, you really want to build out and back. You really want to make this work of, and I guess that is also a luxury of often designing for myself. Like, I don't know how feasible and practical something like that might be if you're transporting 20 centerpieces from
Mm.
your studio to a wedding venue. So that is probably a luxury of kind of creating floral art versus really having to whip things out and deliver something. Um, but but that's really, I really do try to think of, because and I'm really inspired by the garden, like just kind of going out in the garden and seeing
Yeah.
how things are growing, because like you were talking about with the forsythia branches, where they're not these stunted little like things if you don't
Soldiers.
prune them. But just watching the natural movement of the plants as they're growing really informs a lot of how I use them in my designs as well, which in the end also hopefully creates enough variety in my design so it doesn't get overly boring. That is not always the same thing, where I do kind of have my go-to shape of kind of coming up and then down, the where you kind of have your natural flow that you gravitate toward. But I try to play with shape a lot by using the foundational elements first and foremost as they're kind of growing, or as you can kind of see how the flower is placed on the stem, how it wants to be positioned.
Yeah. So what do you start with? Like when you have a container, I mean, obviously, you see you're inspired by a color, you're inspired by a flower, you're
Right.
inspired by something you see in nature. So then you go and you collect these things. And then
Yeah.
you're sitting at your table and you have your vessel and you're like, okay, where does Emily begin?
So I always begin with those like super sturdy elements, um, often I really like to incorporate fruit and vegetables into my arrangements. So often when I'm using a plum branch, or like I made an urn the other month with like apple branches. Like, so
Mhm.
when I'm using those kind of more definitive elements, like that's usually what I start with, because that's going to kind of define my shape and where I'm kind of going to build toward. So that's what I always start with, are those kind of, and that's really what I use my flower frog for, is just kind of pinning those really definitive stems in place. Um, and then I'll kind of go into some more like spirea, or the something kind of like gently branched but still supportive. Yarrow, like things that are kind of have enough structure to support my layers, but not too bulky, and I don't use so much greenery, but I use a decent amount of foliage. Like, so I do incorporate a lot of colored foliage, like where you get especially, that's why autumn is so amazing, but even throughout spring and summer, I rely super heavily on heuchera, but more so as kind of a finishing element to really, but it has these wonderful colors. It really plays. So okay, so if I could backtrack to my
Sure.
elements that I need in my garden, it would be roses, dahlias, pansies, um, a complementary um, backbone of those kind of confused annuals, and heuchera. Like, I have a rainbow of heuchera in my garden that I use super heavily, since I have a lot of depth and dimension in my arrangements, to avoid any pockets where you might take a peek at mechanics. I really kind of stick. I tend to finish things off by going in and just putting color coordinated heuchera in there, so that it becomes still one with your color palette, but you're hiding any remaining mechanics that might still be visible.
Yeah, one of the images you sent, there was a heuchera that had the most, I don't know, it was insane. It was like this. rusty, pinky, reddy foliage. I don't even know how to describe it. It was, you have to go to the website and see. It
Yeah.
was it was insane. And I sometimes I get scared of that flower. I mean, the flower itself is not, I mean, it's pretty and it's really fun to use,
Right.
but it's not to me the showstopper that the colored foliages are. And
Exactly.
so do you find that that foliage lasts for you, or is it something like you could do for a photo shoot or a wedding?
No, if you have it hydrated, heuchera lasts forever. Like I'll go back upstairs to my attic after like a 2 week hiatus of designing or whatever, or being in the garden a lot, and I'll still have this little pot of, because I always have like my staple my staple backup of heuchera leaves ready at the ready. But I'll still have that little like pot of water with the heuchera in there, and they're still looking amazing. So the leaves themselves, if you hydrate them quickly after harvesting and keep them well hydrated, they'll perform amazingly. Out of water, so if they're
Right,
hydrated, if you hydrate them and kind of let them have a good drink before really using them in a bouquet, for example, and if the bouquet throughout the wedding is going to be placed back in water regularly or occasionally, or however the bride might want to do it, um, you'll probably be okay. But I wouldn't use it for an installation, or so, I wouldn't really
right,
use it for something that's going to have to perform long term out of water.
right. Well, I think I'm really excited to hear that because I didn't know that. I always felt like, I mean, when I've used it, it's been for an event or something. So, it lasted 24 hours. I don't think I ever really tested it.
Probably depends on
Um,
the weather too. If you're going to be in really hot conditions, maybe it would kind of start to poop out on you. If you have it out on the centerpiece out on a table. Or, yeah. So yeah, maybe we're pretty lucky that we're super mild here. Although the summers get hot. So yeah,
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 I think it's all about water. I mean, I think it's about the water and because sometimes with those delicate stems, you have to really be deliberate about getting it in the water.
absolutely.
Because sometimes you feel like you just, oh, it's in, and a lot of the things are forgiving, but that might not be the most forgiving thing.
Right.
And so that's really okay. So I love what you just shared about the design, because I think when you use going back to like your branches or your fruit, or that spirea, whatever it is, that helps define the space that you're now going to fill in, and it gives you the parameters. Do you usually tend to go for what I would call a face flower or a focal flower then at that point? Because you have so many layers. I mean, you really do in your design technique have a lot of layers. And I love that description of it, because when you first see it, you're just, I mean, this is me. I'm just amazed at the design, and you don't sit there and actually study it
Right.
sometimes, or I don't. Now somebody else may do that, but I'm just like, I'm flower crack thinking, oh my gosh, look at that pansy, and I'm freaking out over that. And so, but anyway, that's just me. And so is your next step, you fill in with some greenery or foliages, and the distinction there being color and texture, I would think.
Like I think people tend to think of greenery as needing to be green, but there's so many amazing options out there that would work amazingly with any color palette you're going for anyway.
Yeah. So then that focal flower, is that what's next, or do you start layering in some of these more delicate things?
Sometimes it's so hard for me to define what I consider a focal flower in the designs. Like sometimes you might use bulkier flowers that would be maybe considered a focal flower because you've got groupings of them throughout, but sometimes like three pansies placed through, that might be what I really want
Sure.
be the focus. Like I think it depends. I guess it depends on whether you're thinking of a focal flower in terms of the kind of what is going to become the body of the centerpiece, or what you want people to look at, what you want people's eyes to go to straight away when they see it. And so often I save my focal flowers, the ones that I really want people to notice. And like you were saying, the pansy, where you look at a design and you're like, whoa, like I want those, like I'll save those for last because I really want to be super intentional about where I'm placing and how they're placed, so that's really going to be often one of my last layers that I add are those like wowzer elements.
The money flower there that really.
Yeah, the money, yeah, exactly.
Oh, we have so much to talk about. Photography. Um, you take all of your images, right?
Most like almost everything, if unless it's credited to a photographer, like I really like from a lot of the workshops, obviously we'll have a professional photographer come in and photograph the experience and student work and everything. So when I'm sharing those, I try to always credit the photographer. I also have a really wonderful photographer friend who lives here in Belgium who I happen to meet up with, which is amazing because there's no better power couple than a photographer and a florist.
Yes. If you're working on your to-do list for 2021, you want to find a photographer to be best friends with. So besties.
Yeah. So unless they're specifically credited, I take the pictures, yeah. And most of the ones that would be like on brand for me, quote unquote, since our workshops tend to be more lighter, ethereal, kind of more neutral experiences for people's portfolios. The kind of like on brand photos that you would most likely associate with my work would be taken by me, like the kind of darker, moodier shots.
Yeah. So what? Okay. At what point? I'm trying to remember back when I first came across your feed. I don't remember as many darker, like black background images. And then recently, I see that trend for you where you're doing a lot of that, which of course only makes it better. Um, and so, is there a reason why you're switching that? Is it just your taste? Is it kind of what you feel is trending?
It's it's like choosing the flowers that you grow. How you present your work is also kind of constantly evolving a little bit, you know, in terms of um and not that there's totally not that there's anything wrong with copying. I actually encourage copying on some level when you're first getting started to really figure out what it is that you like about a certain
Sure.
aspect of a style or whatever. But when you have students kind of coming through and learning and then going back, and, you know, so all of a sudden you'll see like black backdrops popping up more and more often. You know, and then at a certain point, it's almost like, huh, like, do I want to kind of veer in another direction? You know, I kind of had this more like maybe I want to go into like a pre-Raphaelite, like kind of like where you have these draped fabrics, you know, something even different than the black backdrop. But I still keep circling back to it. It just feels really. There's just something that I really like about how it allows you to really focus on the flowers in some weird way by also choosing the lighting, like what's highlighted and what's disappearing into the shadows, and kind of creating that drama of the arrangement in a way.
Well, I think that's just the burden of being a visionary and just setting trend. You know, people just want to copy you. I mean, you can't help it. So.
Perfect. So I've revolutionized the Belgian flower industry. No, no, I see so many cool ways of presenting. Like there are so many really beautiful ways of presenting your flowers that often I'm like, oh, that's nice, you know, like, oh, maybe I should try that and experience. Like I've really fallen in love with a lot of the painted backdrops that you kind of get. That's kind of the newer thing, like the canvas backdrops that have really cool color palettes going on. Like that, I think would be really cool. You know, there are so many wonderful ways of expressing yourself and presenting your work. But I do think brand is important in terms of recognition and being able to share something and have it seen as like, ah, yeah, like, oh, I looked at that for a millisecond and I knew that was so and so, or, you know, that kind of. I mean, a flower is obviously like your style does that, but I think how you present your work on social media also
Mm.
helps to really clarify your branding and styling. So I'll probably stick with the black backdrop for a while, I guess.
Well, I mean, and that's really true because when you're, you know, scrolling through a feed and you come across one of your images, I mean, you know, it's you. I mean, that's just that becomes part of it. And I think that's great. Any tricks with photography that you feel like are really important or what you really strive for? I want to say one thing while you're thinking is that the thing I like about the black background is it really allows the light that hits your product and your design to just let those colors pour off the page or pour off the image.
Right.
There's no like I hate to say confusion, but there's no distraction. It's like
Yeah. It's like the white backdrop that a lot of people use as well to really, like you said, like have zero confusion and just present purely the flowers. I think the black backdrop is a really wonderful way of doing that and providing a mood at the same time. Like, and I think it totally depends on your audience. Like if you're wanting to present a portfolio of photographs to get bridal work and wedding work, maybe a dark black backdrop and moody lighting won't win over like
no, it's a good point.
So it really is kind of about choosing your niche and who you would like to appeal to. And like the white backdrop might be really wonderful for a more modern approach and really getting those like classy modern brides who and really but equally focusing on the flowers as you would with the black backdrop. So for photography, yeah, like defining your backdrop is huge, and like your styling, like how you want to, and I understand not everybody has the time to create floral art, like really dedicating half an hour or 15 minutes even to photographing your creations, because sometimes you're creating something and it has to go out the door within like 10 minutes, or you really have to kind of, so I understand that, but if you have just kind of, if you can set up a little corner in your studio where even if it has to go out the door within 10 minutes, you can set it down, kind of have your go-to props or not. If you want just flowers, that's fine. Like I think the natural, like I use a wood table, and I think that also, like choosing what you're placing it on, like so just kind of choosing that styling corner and really spending a few moments to consider all of your ingredients, like what you're placing it on. I've seen people use like those transparent cubes, which is a really cool way of also not distracting from the flowers. It's like a different approach. So really choosing like what you're going to place your flowers on, your backdrop, any styling that you might want to add. Like I really love adding seasonal fruit, because since my flowers are so from the garden and in the season and in the moment, I think adding fruit from the garden is a really cool way of kind of like extending the arrangement further.
Totally.
So those little elements make a big difference, and just in terms of styling, and then in terms of actually taking the photograph, they're really cool. Like if you're going for dark and moody, you can even take some really cool, like all of the videos that I share online are just taken on my iPhone. And just by really kind of playing around with the light setting, like which I didn't know until I did flowers for Darcy Benencosa's a photography workshop. She was showing people how to take an iPhone picture, and she was like, oh yeah, hold there, focus, and then pull down the sun, and you can really adjust your exposure level. And I was just like, what? So it's like these weird, and so even if you're doing purely iPhone photography or phone photography, whatever phone you might have, there are ways of really on the phone immediately adjusting your exposure level, which could straight away give you that really light and airy effect that you're looking for, or the really dark and moody effect. So just by taking a quick snap like that, you can really adjust your mood and brand that you're presenting. But I use a Sony Nex 6 camera with a 35mm lens, and to me, that's like my winning combination. Like I find that I'm able to both capture the arrangement as a whole and kind of manually focus on floral elements that I really want to have stand out. So I'm able to get both kinds of photographs, which I think is nice.
Yeah, that really is nice. And I love that tip too, because I feel like about just having a place, a little corner that's just already done. I mean, it's already there. So especially if you're doing wedding work or you have a flower shop and you have a piece you really want to, just having it all set up. So you can just go ahead and jump over there, put it in place, make sure your lighting's good, and then take some images. I mean, at that point, it could take 5 minutes, 10 minutes at tops, because everything is already set up. And it's just.
And since you have that corner and you're taking all your flower photos in that corner, that's going to brand you, like then all of your photos and your portfolio is going to have a certain aesthetic that feels cohesive and true to who you are.
I love that. I didn't even think about that. And it's like, that's such a great point. That consistency. I mean, it's
exactly consistency.
I love that.
I think branding is all about consistency.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Around obviously experimenting and having fun with the whole thing, but kind of creating some kind of line that you can follow throughout the whole process.
Well, yeah, yeah, I can't tell you. I mean, I can't even count. There's more than I have fingers on my hands. The people that have gotten on our podcast and to talk about the importance of taking that time. And you may not always have the time every week, but still taking the time to play with flowers, because that will help you kind of see, okay, I love this element, or I love this style, or I love this part of what I do, and then do more of it. And
Yeah,
um, yeah, it's great.
totally.
Well,
That creative time is so special and so important to maintaining growth. Otherwise, you might like have a burnout, or you might get so tired of doing the same thing over and over again that because you haven't given yourself that chance to try something new or explore something a little different. Even if it's just a new ingredient or a new bowl that you're using, like just little things can really be like a ooh moment.
yeah, totally, totally. And it's so funny because I feel like a lot of times, you know, we feel like we can't do that, but I feel like, there's the professional development side, your evolution, that, personally, your design style, but there's also, like you just said, there's mental health benefits of it too, because it's so easy to get burned out and drift away from what you love about what you do. And I think that's great. Um, and it's funny we're talking about this right now because I know that a couple things, teaching is near and dear to your heart. I feel like mentoring is near and dear to your heart.
Yeah.
I know with 2021 you've been busy working on some stuff. Tell us what's going on, what's coming up, and just want to, how can we learn more and get more of Emily?
So I spent the majority of 2020 using the flowers from my garden, trying to find a way, since there isn't a huge demand for what I'm doing right here in Belgium. So much of my garden visitors and students, so many of them come from other places. Like I have a huge amount of students that usually would come from South Korea, a bunch from the US. Yeah, so it was a really frustrating year in terms of basically impossible travel conditions. Luckily, some interest picked up locally, like from France, and I had a couple amazing students here from Belgium, actually, which was really wonderful. But the majority of my time was spent creating and trying to figure out a way to do something virtually in my own way, like in a way that felt comfortable for me and and felt true to who I am, and not just kind of throwing videos out there and thinking like, hey, okay, here I am, take what you want and give me money.
Right, you're trying to be authentic. I mean, that's totally, yeah.
Because there's so much, that's what I love so much about the in-person workshops and the collaborative workshops and the one-on-one student classes, is this really creative exchange that happens, and that you're really inspiring one another, and it's such a special experience, and I really wanted to extend that virtually as well, and try to come up with a way that that maintained that essence of collaboration and designing together, but grew with technology and the times.
Mm-hmm.
So I initially got super excited about, I pre-recorded all of this material, and I struggled, like we were talking about a little bit earlier before we started recording, about how the post-processing and like the editing of it all, and the lighting, oh my gosh, setting up like a lighting, like taking pictures is one thing, but trying to film myself and capture that accurately, and most of all capture the flowers accurately on camera, was a struggle. Like, and you would get your setup going, and all of a sudden the cloud off, so it was all this, it was a huge learning experience, which was really wonderful, but it also allowed me time to create and to really think about how I wanted to connect with people on a virtual level. So I decided that I would love to do a growing together, a real mentorship, because growing your own flowers and floral art is so intertwined for me. I thought it would be really wonderful to offer a virtual experience throughout the whole growing season, to really to grow and design together, for a really small group of people. So far, there's been some interest in that. I just launched that for my website subscribers last week, and there was some interest in the growing side, like pretty minimal, which is a bummer, because to me, I love that so much. But you got the students from like Hong Kong who didn't have a garden or a balcony to really grow on, and really wanting to just learn the design aspect, or a lovely lady from Texas who was like, I'm already growing flowers, but I really want to learn design, so I kind of simplified it to become a program that I've called Celebrating the Seasons. So where it's really an interactive and inspirational program, where I've created an online classroom where students will have access to watch the pre-recorded material that I really worked hard on last year, as well as some really interesting artistic exercises and PDFs, just in terms of like recipe breakdowns, what flowers I'm using, and the step-by-step photograph slide of how I build my arrangements, so you really see, because it's one thing to verbalize it and to watch it, but it's really cool to kind of see almost like a stop motion of the arrangement being made. So I have that available online for people to watch as much as they would like. And then throughout the entire growing season, starting from April until October, I'll be leading live demonstrations each month. So using elements from the garden, and where people, like through Zoom, so people can design with me if they want, so we can really get this interactive. They'll have had exposure to the mechanics and really my approach to it, and really hopefully started to understand how I go about designing just from the pre-recorded demonstrations. And then so we can hop right into the live demonstrations and really kind of get into having fun together and make it a really kind of collaborative artistic experience, which is nice. And there's been a lot of interest for that. So that's close to getting full. And equally, I don't want to have this massive program. I really want to have a really small group where we can really get to know each other and feel comfortable designing together and discussing kind of really the interesting concepts, and getting into more in-depth conversations about how we're designing and how we're using flowers and how we're choosing the flowers. So I'm really limiting the amount of members that I'll be allowing to join in on those. But I'm super excited. It's a really interesting mix so far. It's like you've got your flower growers who are interested in, like you were saying, kind of learning more about how to design with the flowers that they're already growing. So that's a really nice aspect that some people will be bringing to the group. I've got florists who just kind of want to learn further and explore new techniques. I've got total beginners. It's also totally fine for beginners, because I'm super dedicated to just starting from scratch. And I think hopefully people will find that my approach is pretty intuitive and feels natural, I hope. It feels natural for me, obviously, but hopefully the way I present it will be easy to understand and easily absorbed.
Well, I think,
so I'm talking your ear off, but
no, it's good. I mean, I think that, that's the hard part. I feel like a lot of times you can take a course and you can learn some fundamental mechanics, or you can learn techniques and things like that. But I feel like having a place to be creative and to understand, like to be able to walk into like your mind and see how you create can sometimes help people learn how to be that way themselves. Because that's one of the things, being in the industry for years and years and years, I was always amazed because there's so many incredible flowers and so many people. It's like basically and I hate to use the word copying, but basically, they're just mimicking things that either brides have brought them, or things they've seen that, from people they follow. And that's all good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that really. But yet in the same way, it's kind of like having training wheels. At some point you got to take the training wheels off your bike and soar. And I feel like sometimes we're afraid to do that because we don't think we're creative, or we don't think we're that creative, or we're just that negative mindset that sort of just interferes with the process that, it's okay and it's fun. And I think sometimes being able to follow in the footsteps, hand in hand with someone like yourself to, learn your creative process can sometimes help us get those training wheels off and help us develop those skills ourselves. So I totally get it.
Totally. Part of the program involves an exercise that I call authentic artistry, and really kind of a series of questions to really a journey of self-discovery, of floral self-discovery, where you can really kind of figure out, because I do think that, and so I have these series of questions, and then my aim is to have people complete that themselves first and really kind of explore their own inspirations and their own like what they are, elements, choose like several elements that really from a specific style, like really dissect a style and what is it that you like from that, and what is it that you like from that, and I think because I started by copying and really trying to by wearing training wheels and writing with training wheels, like you said.
Yeah.
And it's through really kind of reflection and looking inside and figuring out what is it that inspires me, what do I like about that, what do I like about that, and kind of taking those different elements that all of a sudden you find your own artistic voice and really figure out who you are as an authentic artist. And there's only one you, and the goal of this is not at all to come out of the course to being able to imitate what I've created. The goal is to really facilitate your growth as your own artist, and using what's seasonal and what's there and what's inspiring you.
Thank you for saying that, because I didn't want to sound like, copying somebody or imitating somebody with the training wheels is a negative thing, because everybody begins somewhere.
Right.
And and different things inspire different people to want to, to design a certain way. And and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that and thank you, this is what I appreciate about what you just said is, at some point learning and developing those skills to become your own, because each of us is different, and we have a different set of eyes, and we have a different set of, taste perhaps of what we like and what we don't like. You like to bring fruit in. Somebody else may hate fruit.
Totally.
They want to bring vegetables in. We don't want to be discriminatory towards our produce.
Totally. Yeah. No, it's so important to really embrace that, to recognize that and embrace it, and really use that to your advantage. Yeah. That is what's going to eventually make you stand out as Scott Shepherd.
Yeah. Wow. That's scary. Well, whoa. Yeah. So what is your favorite part about teaching?
Oh, wow. I think my favorite part is that it combines everything that I love. It combines flowers, people, creativity. Like it's just this combination of all these elements that's where all of a sudden international studies and like this fascination with people and who are you and wanting to get to know you, and like this super social personality that I have comes in with flowers and creating something together. I think it's just the energy, the overall energy, and the combination of all the elements that I love so much.
Oh, I love that. Well, I know we're going to put links to, or I still have at least one more question, but we are going to put links to all of your stuff on our website on your page. So that way you can find everything, Emily and all of her stuff. And it's just amazing. I'm really excited too that you shared about the whole gardening part of it, because, it's so funny. It's like from the very beginning, I knew that about you, and I don't know how I learned that about you, but I knew that about you. But I bet there's a lot of people out there that don't realize that is such a huge part of what you do, and think of you for that. So now that the whole world has heard the fact that, you know, you have this offering too, but I mean, I just think it's great because there's a whole side of your creative process that starts with a seed, it starts with a plant,
Does, totally
and
does.
and
Yeah.
and you have years of experience of doing that as well. And you know, maybe you don't grow to supply grocery stores or to supply florists and to do all this kind of stuff, but your gift in selecting blooms and the creative process of what you put in the garden, I think, is huge. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah,
That
so that's fun.
I think maybe 2020, if 2020 did anything, maybe it's making people connect with that side, you know, with kind of thinking
Yes.
smaller and thinking, you know, especially I know when we had our first conversation on Zoom, the flower industry was in a major crisis, you know, in terms of
Yes.
flowers not even being shipped from Holland and them being destroyed at the auction, you know, so and all of a sudden this moment of like, wow, like maybe I can provide for myself, or maybe you know, and I know so many people started like vegetable gardens this year, and like maybe the same will happen with flower gardens too, where people really appreciate the unique and original aspect that growing your own can provide,
Yeah.
depending on your market, obviously, I suppose. But
Right. No, and I love that. I love that idea. So I always love to end our episodes with asking for a piece of advice, and and it can be something that maybe someone shared with you that meant a lot, or something that you or kind of have learned over the course of the year that you'd like to share with everybody.
oh, let me think. I mean, immediately what comes to my mind and what I've been thinking about a lot is this one lyric from oh gosh, you know what? I don't even know the name of the song, but it's the lyric is it's like, I just dance the way I feel, and I think that is so important. I think so I guess it's not technically a piece of advice, but it's something that goes straight to my heart, and I really do feel like, as artists and floral artists, like, just dance the way you feel, and whatever comes out will be totally you and totally amazing.
I love that. That's great. And um, I want to share with everybody too that we had earlier in the year. It's around May. When is it in May? Is International Lonely Bouquet Day?
Last weekend of June,
That's right.
last Sunday of June.
That's right. And so the last Sunday of June. And so we did an Instagram live together, the two of us, and we talked about all of that. And if you want to learn more about that, go back and watch that. It's in our IGTV on Instagram, and it's really, actually, I think it may even be on YouTube too. And so we want to make sure people know about that because that's a great, great program. We had fun. We had fun putting some bouquets around as
Wasn't
well,
it so
and
much fun?
it really was. And then I was really nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to drive around and see if anybody picked them up. And
I
uh,
know, I know.
and sure enough, they were all gone. So that was great.
And
Um,
they're still there. You're like, why?
now, yes, that's like a truly lonely bouquet. So anyway,
Oh, I'm so
um,
glad you had fun with it.
yeah, we did. So you can learn more about that. Learn more about Emily on our website. And thank you, Emily, so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Scott. This was such a wonderful, wonderful way to start the new year. I feel awakened and inspired already.
Me too. I love that.
Ready to go
Thanks.
run on the snow.
Oh, I
Give
don't know
those
about
more
that.
there.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott.